I'm joined today by a gentleman named Mike Frith, who I met first time at the gathering. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Andy. How are you?
I'm not doing too bad. I'm reflecting on the gathering being not that far away, but actually it wasn't that recent either. But it was such an amazing event. It still feels very fresh in my mind.
Yeah, mine too. It's a couple of months now, isn't it? But it
Yeah,
was it was impressive. I think that's probably the word, isn't it?
impressive. A few people have said, "How can you describe it?" And I don't think I can. You just need to be there to work it out for yourself because it was amazing, and I loved every second of it.
Yeah, that's what people told me before I went, and now I know what they meant. You do have to experience it to kind of get your head around it. So yeah, it was great. I enjoyed
Brilliant.
it.
Good. And we chatted a little bit about Oscar, which is an organization I'd not heard of before, but I always like finding out about things. And the privilege of my job, I guess, is I get to meet people and learn about all these different ministries operating in totally different spheres and ways and approaches to everything. So, just for those who haven't met Oscar before, just give us a bit of an overview about what it is that Oscar does.
So Oscar's been going 25 years almost, and it's basically a web-based mission information and support service. That means everything and nothing. But our vision at the beginning was to, in the early days of the internet, was to start bringing together all the things that would be useful for people doing Christian work around the world. So we started with some very obvious things that they might need, like travel and shipping information, other ministries that might support them for one aspect or another. And it built from there. And of course, as the internet's grown, Oscar has grown to become this very comprehensive service that is now servicing many of the mission organizations who have staff overseas, but now also a lot of UK Christian organizations, because we've got such a broad range of stuff on our service and on our site that there's so many people that find it useful, things that they don't have to go and research themselves, basically, because we do that on a sort of rolling basis.
So, what sort of things might I find if I came to your website then and think, okay, I'm doing some missions work. How could you actually support me then? What are some of those examples?
So one of the first things that people need, and is probably what people know us for the most, are job opportunities or mission opportunities. Even things like short-term stuff and gap year, who does that in the Christian sphere? So we are the biggest advertiser of those opportunities in the UK. We've got about 350 on our site at the moment. It goes up and down a bit. Just under half of those, I think, are in the UK. The rest are all around the world. So a lot of organizations use us to advertise those opportunities. So when somebody's feeling like, God's calling me to do this, or I want to do this, the first thing is, how can I make that happen? And finding the right opportunity, if they're not constructing it themselves, is often how they find us. But then beyond that, I think the next things that people find useful are stuff like the travel information. Are there Christian travel agents who can sort out your flight for you, and other arrangements like insurance and stuff like that? Yeah, there are. There's quite a few. And you might think, oh, but I can do that on the internet myself. I can go on Skyscanner or whatever and just find the cheapest deal. Well, you might be able to, but the thing is, then you'll get the budget version. And if you go through a travel agent, they will probably find you a better version for the same price. And they might even get you stuff like extra baggage, because these folk who run these different support ministries are called, like you are, to do what they do. So it's been a really interesting thing, the building up the service like that. We found all these people who have a specialism somewhere that can help you when you just don't know all of that stuff. So that's kind of where people start, with looking for an opportunity and then trying to work out, how can I make this work?
I would imagine also, if you're going for overseas missions, you're saying that maybe half of the current jobs are not in the UK. If you're going overseas, then all of a sudden it's not like you're just going to a package holiday deal in Spain. You're not going to get a hotel and a coach and it's all set up for you. Actually, there may well be other destinations and it may not be quite so simple. So actually, I'm guessing at that point, that extra advice really starts to make itself very valuable.
Yeah, you can't find that information online. You might be traveling to a place that none of the main airlines go to. So how do you make those last connections? You might be going to a place that none of the insurance companies will touch you because they say, oh, that's a war zone, or that's this and that. But you'll find out inside information whereby, no, actually the war's not actually happening there, even though it's in the same country. It's clear on the other side. That's very safe, but still they won't touch you. So you want to know insurance companies or brokers who deal with that, and that they're around. And some of them are Christian, they're Christian owned. So yeah, it is all those specialist bits that people often need to know in a mission situation that you can't find anywhere else.
I would imagine that insurance companies in particular, they're going to be risk averse. I mean, that's the whole point of insurance. They want to get the most money they can, and you have the least risk to get the most profit. If you're going on mission, you're already doing something just a little bit crazy. I say that as somebody who's done it. But you do have to be a little bit crazy to even consider that, at which point you need to move away, I guess, from those risk averse, let's make some money out of this, to people who actually perhaps are more bespoke, more interested in what you want to do.
Yes, exactly. And I know one that was set up. There's an insurance package that was set up. Am I allowed to mention them in a minute? I mean, I can always say that others are available.
No, it's fine.
So these guys, let me tell you about them first. I mean, they're linked with Youth with a Mission initially, but they discovered that any other insurance that they were trying to get always had gaps in it. If you were traveling between places, they wouldn't insure you. If you were going to certain places, they wouldn't insure you. So, all those little small print things that were really frustrating that would catch you out. And as you say, because they're risk averse and they don't want to, lose money on you, they still want to make it. So what they did is they went looking for an insurance package that would cover everything, even when you're back home in the UK on furlough or home assignment or holiday. It would cover you for the in-between bit. So yeah, this is Talent Trust, they're called. So that's a great product. There are others that do other aspects, and we've got a whole list of insurance folk on our site. But I met these guys, and it was really interesting. That's the kind of thing, somebody somewhere has sorted something out to make it work for missionaries in particular, or people in the Christian world that go and do something worthwhile somewhere else. So it's just knowing about them, because sometimes you can't find them on Google. You actually have to be linked in some other way, and that's really what Oscar does.
And it's that linking together which is crucial. When I've done full-time church ministry in the past, one of my passions has always been, well, let's get Christians worshiping together somehow, because you know what, we can do greater stuff together than we can on our own little things, doing our own little things here and our own little thing over there. And actually, if we start to work together, there's more of a thing. And actually, you might find that some of those people you're talking to might actually start to pray for you, which for me personally was always the greatest. Money's great, but prayer is so much better, because with that comes a letter or an email or a timely little text message. How are you doing? And that is so powerful.
Yeah, exactly. Networking as you go and building up a whole network of people who do end up praying for you, supporting you, encouraging you, and all that stuff, that I think again is really important in any kind of Christian work, because you can feel quite isolated. Even in the UK, you're often doing ministry in a situation where you're the only one doing that ministry in that situation. Even if there's other Christians around you, they're not quite sticking their neck out like you are. So having people who kind of believe in you and are behind you and backing you, yeah, very important.
So let's go back a bit in time then for Oscar. Where did it begin? I mean, you said the early days of the internet, but what's the root of it? I mean, is this yours thing, or did you think, well, this is a good idea? I mean, how do you start when the internet is still quite new and young, and what can we do with it? And back then we probably didn't know really, because we can email our friends or whatever. Video chats, that wasn't really a thing. Where did Oscar really come from?
So the background is crucial, really. So I spent 10 years working as a pilot and an engineer with Mission Aviation Fellowship with MEF. So I was overseas. My first overseas time was 3 years in the States doing training. So I did my culture shock there, went through sort of living and working in another country initially there, came back, got married, learnt French, went with MAF to Madagascar, and then to Uganda. We did a term in each. So from start to finish, I was kind of on MAF's books for 10 years. But particularly in the last term in Uganda, but it had started in Madagascar. I remember being in Madagascar in the early 90s, and was invited to a new company in the capital who was setting up an internet service provider. Nobody knew what that was then, ISP. And they invited people from the various charities, the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, to go and have a little demonstration. So I went to this thing, and they showed the first web pages.
Wow.
And this was quite something. This was sort of mid 90s, 94, I think, something like that. Because we thought it would be useful for our work. I mean, running an aircraft operation in a sort of a developing world country, we thought this is going to probably revolutionize what we do with things like bookings and contact. So it's more from that perspective. But from those very early experiences, and we got the internet as an organization, and we got it individually, so we could start setting up email to have link with home, which wasn't there before. I started to see the potential for this to be a sort of the platform to build a support network on for anybody in mission. And so after Madagascar, our term in Uganda, I started looking into this a little bit and realized that there were other people who were setting up sites, other Christians, to do various things that would be of use to people in mission. So MAF was encouraging us after 2 terms of serving with them. For a little while, they were encouraging all their staff to take sabbaticals, and you had to decide what you would do on your sabbatical. It could be related to your work, but you couldn't do exactly the same thing as you were doing in your ministry. So one of the things that I thought of doing was just researching this whole area. What resources are there out there appearing on the internet that would be of use to people in Christian missions work? But just before the end of our second term, they changed their policy on sabbaticals, and they said, well, you could take a sabbatical, but we can't support it financially. And it's like, well, how am I going to do this then? So you could leave the organization, and if you can rejoin and come back in. But actually quite a lot had happened by then, and I think we felt from God that it was the right time to step out of the organization and do this, because it had grown and grown. And some of it is, as I spoke to missionaries that I flew. I mean, the thing about MAF, you're single pilot operations, so we always have a passenger sitting next to us on the flights. And so I get to know them quite well. And I quizzed so many of them about this thing buzzing around in my head, what do you think about this? Would it be useful for you? And it's like, yeah. I mean, the 2 issues that they faced was lack of information about knowing what's out there, but also lack of connection with knowing people who can help you. So they were the 2 things that Oscar was built on. So I started this research project as we were leaving MAF, but it became quite apparent in a few months, because I went round some of the mission organizations here in the UK and asked them about this. And they all said, this would be amazing, because we're trying to do this ourselves at the moment with virtually no resources. So I thought, well, if we could centralize this and have one service that they can all feed into and tap into, that would save so much. So that's the vision of Oscar, really. We've ended up, quite a lot of these organizations use us for so many things, and are relieved to do that, because they don't have to have a staff member or 2 who spend all their time researching, like the Christian travel agents, where they can get cheap flights, the insurance, because we do that. So they just use us. And even some of them now say to their staff, well, whatever you need, go to Oscar first, and if you can't find it there, then come back to us, because it's maybe more specific to your situation or your role, and we'll help you research that. So yeah, that was kind of the vision. It was being at the front end, and with our own needs as well, because I started using stuff in our situation that I'd found on the internet that I thought, this is just great if everybody else could know where this is. So it needed to be a bit of a sharing hub as well. And that's what it is. When somebody finds something useful, they share it through our service.
I didn't know that. That's a really interesting story. And I love how you're trying to help other organizations, but especially as you said, you were out there, wherever that may have been, helping missionaries. And actually, I suppose in a sense, you're probably the perfect person because you're getting there. I can't believe I haven't got this information. Oh, that didn't come through. I can't get hold of so and so. And you're sitting there then thinking, what if I could, join the dots on this? What an amazing picture that would be, and what an amazing picture you've made over nearly 25 years, which is astounding.
Yeah, I mean, being a pilot with MAF was the perfect training ground for setting up and running Oscar. I'm amazed as I look back, even years later, I thought, I can't think of another role that I could have had overseas that would have given me so much good experience and exposure to be able to do what I do now. And it still kind of feeds me. I still not only understand being a missionary myself, I also got insight into lots of other people's situations because I either flew them or stayed with them or they stayed with us because that was part of the role. So yeah, it was really, really crucial.
Awesome. I never thought driving trucks over 20 years would be a perfect foundation for running a radio station that we set up from scratch. But actually, the ability to go to festivals, know how to get stuff in a car, logistics, driving, which we do quite a bit. Actually, a lot of what I do, I look back to trucking and think that was really useful, but I never thought that would be used in any kind of ministry way like this. Let's go back a bit further in time then. So what's your story of faith? You're talking about being a missionary with MAF, who obviously some of us would have heard of, perhaps not known necessarily about it enough, but what was your story of faith?
So I grew up in the church from 2 weeks old. Parents took me along to my fairly traditional Methodist church, and grew up through the youth group. But even before then, I remember my brother not wanting to go to church at the age of sort of 12. And my parents said to him, when you're 14, you can choose not to go. But until then, you come with us. So as soon as he was 14, he stayed at home. And I couldn't wait till I was 14 because I could make the same decision because it was pretty boring. But then at about 13 and a half, I discovered the youth group. And I thought, oh, this is cool. I quite like, this group of people, and got to know them. And going to church on a Sunday was another chance to see them all. So I stayed. But when I went away to university, I discovered really that the faith that I'd had, aside from the group of friends that I'd grown up with in the church, was probably more in my parents' faith or in other people that I thought, well, if they can have faith, so can I. And I went away to university and I had a bit of a crisis because I thought I haven't got much faith of my own. So I kind of spent a bit of time trying to work that out. But thrown in with that was what I was going to do with my life career-wise. So I'd gone to do mechanical engineering because kind of maths and physics was my forte at school. I was very interested in aircraft. I wanted to go into the aircraft industry. So doing engineering sort of got you in there, and it was a combination of my skills. I also, as soon as I got to uni, I discovered the University Air Squadron, which, if you've ever heard of this, the RAF has these little training squadrons all around the UK that they take in university students and they train them to fly, basic flight training. And it's actually the RAF's biggest pilot recruitment tool. More RAF pilots go through this system than anything else. It's a 2-year commitment that is really no commitment. You can leave whenever you like. They can throw you out whenever you like, and you just go at weekends while you're at university and learn to fly. So I loved this. This was a chance for me to learn to fly for free. The RAF paid for it. So I had this crisis of faith with this in the background. I was flying and loved it. I was doing engineering, wanting to go into the aircraft industry. Wasn't sure about staying on to the RAF. I could do that. I could have done that more permanently and signed up. I went away on a young adult weekend that was linked with the church that I grew up in, part of the Methodist Church. There's a thing called Methodist Association of Youth Clubs years ago, MAYC. They had these big weekends for young people, and then they had these young adult weekends. And I've been on a few of these, and I went to one where all this was coming together in my head, and I went on it, and I basically said to God at the beginning of the weekend, you need to show up on this weekend, or I'm just going to be going my own way and making my own decisions, because I'm not even sure you're real, kind of thing. And I had this, and I don't think I'd told anybody that I was having this crisis, because I didn't want somebody else to interfere and try to orchestrate stuff. It had to be God. So I stayed on this whole weekend, and by Sunday lunchtime, which was the end of the weekend, nothing had happened. And I thought, am I going to just drive home? Because this was north of Manchester, where I was at university. And I discovered they had a youth service in the church where the weekend was on the Sunday evening. And because I wasn't far away, everybody else left. I stayed to the youth service, actually with one or two other people who stayed. And this youth service, the guy who was leading it was the guy that led the weekend as well. He was quite well known in Methodist circles. It was like the service was for me. Lots of people experienced this. Everything that he was saying was kind of like, crumbs, this is like speaking to me. And so I got to a point, I'm just sitting there in the congregation towards the end of his sermon, where I started saying to God, okay, what are you going to do for me? I'm hearing all of this stuff, but I still need you to do something for me. I need to know you're real. And I heard him say in my heart, what are you willing to do for me? Oh, that's true. I'm not really willing to do anything. I just wanted him to do stuff for me. But he said to me, what are you willing to do for me? Where are you willing to step out in faith? So I said, yeah, you're right. Okay, I'm willing. So the chap who was leading the service made an appeal. So I just got out of my seat and walked up the front, because I thought, all these people, I don't care. As embarrassing as this is, I'm going to do it. There's only one other person that walked up the front in this appeal. So there's two of us in the midst of all these young people. It must have looked quite, it was quite a scary thing for me to do as a shy introvert. So I went up the front, and everything came together. All the questions I had about whether God was real were no longer questions. I felt him in that moment as much as I feel anything. And interestingly, all the things that I had questions about career-wise started to fall into place from that moment. I knew from that moment that he wanted me to give my working life to him. So that was, I was willing to just lay it all out there. But I didn't know how that was going to work out with my interest in aviation or anything else, or engineering. But as you said earlier on to me, that when we were chatting before, nothing's wasted really in your background. And I thought, well, God's probably going to use some of that stuff. And yeah, sure enough, within a couple of months, somebody connected me with MAF. And I was amazed that there was this Christian organization that flew aircraft around the world. And I could either be a pilot or an engineer with them, because I did both. And it was just amazing. It was like the missing piece in the jigsaw that I was constructing, the big piece in the middle that made it all, make sense. And so I started to pursue that. I went to Bible college after university because I wanted to sort out this calling, because it was a calling. And I also wanted to get some Bible knowledge behind me, because I just didn't have much. And during that year, everything came together. I started to apply with MAF and started to think about what I needed to train properly for them. And the rest is history, as they say.
I was going to say that dovetails rather neatly into pre-MAF, MAF, and then Oscar, which is what you're doing now, which is fab.
And the bit in between, I never thought I'd be in computers. I remember a guy, I did a paper round in my hometown, and one of the guys on my paper round, he said to me, what are you going to do when you leave school? And at that point, you'll laugh at this, Andy, because of what you've already told me, I wanted to be a truck driver. What's wrong with that? That's great. I just wanted to travel, to drive all day. To me, it was a bit of freedom, and it was, an individual role, being an introvert, I guess, in some ways. But he said to me, you want to get yourself into computers, that's the future. And this was like in the very early 80s. So anyway, I guess he was right at the end of the day. I did get into computers. So I kind of had to retrain a little bit to get au fait with computers when I left MAF. But it's interesting how, an awful lot of flying is not about flying the plane. It's about cockpit management and detail and operating all the stuff. And actually, computing's not so different from that. So I found that I had quite a lot of transferable skills anyway. That meant I was tailor made for this.
That's fascinating stuff. I love it. I love hearing how, and I get this so many times, and it's my honor and privilege to just be on the other side of a camera, a sense. But just the way that God interweaves stuff. But often it's not until 10, 20, 50 years later we look back and think, now I understand why God stopped me from going down that particular path, or why he opened up that path, or why that bad thing happened that actually led to something amazing. Because hindsight being the useless thing it is good to look back and think, do you know what? I see how God was in my life through all of these different things, all weaving together in the most miraculous of ways.
Yeah, it's true. And some of those things I had no idea at the time. Even the tough things I went through, I didn't quite know why, my wife and I. But actually, it's really interesting now. When I meet a missionary who's going through some of what we went through on the field, I understand them because I went through that tough stuff as well. And it was not plain sailing for us at all. And it's nothing is really wasted. And later in life now, and I don't know whether you do this as well, but I'm starting to look at what's happened in my earlier life that hasn't quite been used yet. And I'm thinking maybe God's going to use that in the next phase. So, I've started sort of analyzing things, thinking, okay, was there a reason that I still don't know that happened that maybe is still going to be useful down the line?
Yeah, I do in different ways. When we launched Pure, I thought, what are we doing? I have no background in radio. Why are we here? Why did God choose me? I can think of a dozen people I knew who would be better than me at this. But why is God asking me? But actually, 20 years as a trucker means going to see someone 4-hour drive. Okay. It's not something I have to consider, where most people would break it into 3 little trips and have to stop and they'd be really tired. But for me, I used to drive 10 hours a day. So okay. And it's those little things that make a big difference. Even loading the car doesn't stress me out because, yeah, I've loaded 40-foot trucks with weird looking stuff, and you just start to get an idea for logistics, managing people, and it all starts to feed into what God's asking you to do, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. All those little skills useful. Yeah.
Which you didn't have a clue about at the time. Why am I good at this? Well, it's because of that. But when this is happening, that hasn't happened yet, and yeah. So where does Oscar go? I mean, do you? I mean, obviously you're on the internet, but because you're internet based, but you're going to festivals and stuff, I presume. Do you meet up with ministry organisations?
Yes, quite a lot of them we meet at the festivals, so I get to know an awful lot of people in the kind of Christian and mission world from festivals. That's one of the reasons actually why we go. We go to profile some of our jobs and resources with people who might find them useful that don't know about us, hasn't found us online, or even if they have, we kind of build those relationships. But also we connect a lot with the organizations because they often have stands in the locality where we are, and we as much as we can get around other things where the organizations are at. Sometimes I get invited to the organization's own conference, and I've been to quite a few of those, and that's great. I mean, the most recent one, I went to a day of the mission partners with Church Mission Society, and because we've had a long relationship with them and their home staff and quite a few of their overseas staff, it's just wonderful to be there because I had their overseas staff come out to me saying, we've used Oscar for years, it's been fantastic. And that's just a really nice connection to make, and just make it personal, really, because some of them I had never met. One guy who ran a Christian school overseas linked with CMS, he came up and I knew his name, but I'd never met him physically. It was just brilliant to have a chat with him and find out how useful we've been to him and his school, particularly in recruiting, but in some of the other resources that we had helped with. And then me understand his situation a bit more, because that helps me tailor what we do to be more useful to people on the field. Yeah.
Mike, thank you. When I met you at the gathering, I thought, okay, they do jobs, and that was my first impression because that's what I saw at the stand. But I always like to ask, so what else do you do? Because it always, I don't know, just it brings me such joy to find out the story behind the bit that we do see, because that bit is always it's one piece of a puzzle, and there's a puzzle of puzzles. It's that four-dimensional chess thing of all these things interacting. So thank you for just sharing, not just about Oscar, which is really interesting anyway. I genuinely find it fascinating as someone who's done local missions work, and I had lots of questions that nobody knew the answer to. But didn't exist then. But but what I think is really fascinating is a story that God's brought about in your own life that took you into doing Oscar, and your heart for serving others. So I guess as someone who's not done overseas mission but UK mission, can I just say thank you for what you're doing of helping people who are, you're right, we often feel very alone. We're working in a church, but we feel very alone. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Just give us the website for people to come and can find you, whether they want to advertise a job or find a job or just want some help because they're going to Mongolia and think, where is that on the map? Where do they come to?
So to find the site is just oscar.org.uk. You don't even have to type the W's these days, do you? So that's it.
No.
Yeah, oscar.org.uk, and that will give you access to everything that we've got. It's nearly all online. So somebody's tapping on my glass. I told you this would happen. But, there's other people in the house. So oscar.org.uk. Everything is there. It's all free. So you don't have to pay to subscribe to access all that good information that I talked about earlier. It's all freely available for anybody. Mostly because I know that actually when people are in mission work, they often don't have a lot of spare money. So we decided, as much as we can, we'll make everything free, and we'll work out how to find our stuff from elsewhere, our funding.
Mike, thank you. Oscar.org.uk if you want to find out more and to connect with Mike in whatever context you might need to. Thank you very much for your time today. Have a fantastic rest of your day and week.
Okay, you too. Thank you.